Hi everyone, good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you are in the country. Just want to say thank you and welcome to today's out-of-home office hours. This is Scott Fiaschetti, and I am here with Dylan Maven.
Hello.
As well as Brian Schopper here in the background.
Hello.
As always. So again, just want to say thank you for joining today's session. And as you probably know by now, today's session is going to be about how Geopath impressions are evolving. So we realize, over the past year we've been working on a new measurement currency, and we have a lot of new data inputs, and that also has an impact on the impressions. And so Dylan and I thought it would be really great to talk about that with everyone and give everybody a chance to really understand what is going on. So our goal today is to talk about how the data that we're importing, so the mobile devices, connected car data, app data, is helping us create a more robust measurement system, but also help everyone understand how that is increasing our understanding of audience, passing by inventory, and then what is the data's ultimate impact on impressions overall. And so we'll do a deep dive into that today and really hopefully be able to answer any of your questions. And that leads me to say, if you do have questions, please reach out to us via the question module in Zoom. We'll try to take questions right in real time, because we know that it really helps with contextualizing the answer and really helping understand. So without further ado, I do want to just jump right into it and really talk about this evolution that we've been on over the past year and a half to 2 years, realistically. So this is a pyramid you may have seen before, right? And I do want to make the point that these are the core building blocks of our out-of-home measurement, right? The circulation, we need to understand everybody out there, where they're moving, how they're moving. We need to then overlay our visibility adjustment index to that. And those two portions of the pyramid really form an impression for out-of-home. And then we're able to contextualize that by overlaying demographic information and ultimately calculating our reach and frequency model. So this is not going to change, right? These are the core building blocks, and those are going to stay. It's really thinking about what are the inputs and how those are evolving and how those are becoming much more granular, much more precise, and allowing this better understanding of audience. So looking at the right side of this column, I really want to talk about what are the new inputs and make sure everybody's aware of that. So really with circulation, we are still going to be pulling in traffic counts. We get that question various times when I'm out on the road talking with people and talking with members. So we are still going to be having that, but we're going to be layering mobile trip data onto that. So that is, again, if you've heard us talk, really understand, pulling in that mobile device, aggregated and anonymized mobile device level data, the SDK data from apps. So all of that mobile data really helps us understand how many people out there, who has that opportunity to ultimately see. And we still will be adjusting that by things like illumination, by load factor in vehicles, as well as understanding directionality of the inventory in relation to the people out there on the roads and on the sidewalks. And then we understand, we layer in our visibility adjustment index. So again, we have that basis of that eye tracking research we did multiple times over the past 5 or 6 years or so. But now with our ability to partner with our Here network, we have the understanding of speed data. So how fast people are moving on the road, what are the choices they're making out on the road. So that again helps us to understand and apply specifically the speed data within that is really a great input into our visibility adjustment. And then demographics, partnering with Claritas, that is the key demographic partner for us as we're understanding all the different audiences we have access to today. So, Claritas is pulling in GFK MRI data, US Census data, government data, purchase data. So there's a whole host of different types of data that Claritas is pulling in, and that's allowing us to understand and have greater numbers of audiences that we can look at inventory by. You may have heard in other sessions, talking about how many audiences are available. We have well over, 6,000 audiences in the Insight Suite right now. Dylan, correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost closer to 8,000 from what I hear.
Somewhere.
Yeah, I haven't counted every single one yet, but there's a lot of audiences. And again, we encourage everybody to, if you can, go into the Insight Suite and just check out all of the interesting new audiences that we do have available. And then we layer in our reach and frequency model. And again, that is also being informed by mobile trip data as well. So that's the basics. That is kind of the core foundation, as well as some of the data inputs that are into our new data inputs that are informing our impressions. And Brian, just want to check any questions or anything?
No, nothing.
Okay. Again, please do stop us and please ask questions as we go on. But the other question we get a lot, and that we were talking about on the session today, is like, well, how do you know? How do you know that X% of people passing by this unit have been to a Starbucks in the past 30 days? How do you actually know and get to that point? So I want to do a quick walkthrough on that and really help everybody try to understand that a little bit better. So it all starts out with understanding the households, right? Partnering with Claritas and having the Claritas data at the household level, we're able to understand at a census block group level a lot about households, right? We understand where they live, their demographics, their consumer behaviors, their psychographics. So we're able to look at that and understand at a household level the population. And then we need to understand simultaneously the movement of everybody out there on the roads and on the pathways, moving across their daily lives. So again, this is where the mobile location data really plays a big role and helps us understand the movement and the movement activity, the patterns of movement within the different regions and different roadways that we're looking at. And really an understanding of kind of why people are doing it. What's their mode of travel, what's their intent, what's the motivation for their trip, and where's the destination, and how frequently, how often are they taking these trips. So looking at that allows us to create a nationwide trip matrix of movement around the country, and again, really having to model and understand everybody's movement simultaneously across the country. Dylan, would you add anything to any of that?
No, I think it's.
Yeah.
I think you hit all the big points. It's all about understanding how all persons, not just a sample of devices, but using all the information that we have from different angles to understand how the full population moves on those networks.
Okay. So so we understand who they are, we understand how they're moving, and then we need to tie those trips, we need to connect that to the media that's out there on the roadways. So we do that, so we then contextualize that movement alongside the audited inventory. And so this allows us to understand the audience exposure and those metrics that we often talk about. So the dwell time, and what does that mean in relation to this trip path and how it's taking them in front of a piece of media? What's the opportunity to see, moving them from applying a visibility adjustment index, moving them from an opportunity to see to a likelihood to see any piece of media. So understanding that, we're able to then now apply the target audience. So we're able to contextualize that in terms of the audience. So all of this data is combined, and we're able to understand the composition in terms of reach, frequency, but also against the particular target. So the person who might have said they've been to Starbucks in the past 30 days. So that's at a high level how we get to it, and with hopefully a little bit more description underneath that. And Brian, just want to check in there, see if there's any questions in relation to that. I would guess there may be.
It's basically asking for clarification. So the demographics are survey data rather than behavioral data of the devices themselves. Basically asking about the movement versus the demographics, I think.
Yes, and so again, given our partner at Claritas, their source is a survey-based data that we are leveraging to understand audience.
Yeah, but I want to clarify that.
Yeah.
I mean, the household, the Claritas product is amazing. It has household level profiles for the entire U.S., right? Every single household. And the way that they are able to do that is that they have some amazing foundational surveys that ask very extensive questions like the U.S. Census, as well as the American Community Survey, which is a rolling survey of about 10 million households. But then in addition, there are probably another 100 or so consumer surveys, consumer research products that are integrated into that. And ultimately, at the end of this, they end up having a massive panel of households that they know absolutely every single facet about. Now, those households are from all across the country, and they use what's called a lookalike process to find similar patterns given the handful of other dimensions that they know any household in the area. And so with that process, they can come up with a very solid prediction and composition makeup of every single household in the U.S. And that foundational data set is what we use to understand all the persons in the U.S., in the market, in the local neighborhood, consumer behaviors, how many vehicles per household, age breakdowns by household, and consumer behavior. So while surveys are a good component of it, it isn't just one survey that's taken. Similar to the approach that Geopath takes for audience measurement, you're taking multiple resources together to cross-reference one another, and then have a much more sound view of the full population.
And just a quick question on that. How often is Claritas's data updated?
We're updating Claritas's data annually. Now, their product is, I believe, released quarterly, and we may be exploring that as we increase the cadence of updates. But for now, it's going to be an annual update.
Great. Thank you for the question. So next, sorry. So I want to talk about next is how impressions are evolving. So what are we seeing as we're starting to get into this process where we're applying the new data, and what trends are we seeing? But also, like, what is behind it? What are the key things that impact impressions in our model? But also, what's the impact, and why are these even part of our evaluation? So I'm going to let Dylan maybe take this part in terms of this is kind of an overview of what we're seeing at a high level with the impression data so far.
Yeah, so one of the things that we want to cover today is what are the inputs that we have, sort of the underlying pieces that go into that foundation of that pyramid that Scott was showing. Where are they coming from, and provide a little bit of context for historically looking back. But what we really want to focus on today is what are we doing with the new system, and why are we using these inputs to calculate impressions? How are they used? So when we start breaking down the components of out-of-home impressions, we're going to cover a couple different areas. We're going to talk about the vehicular traffic data, where that comes from, and how that's being calculated, what it's used for, as well as the information about vehicular occupancy, or how many persons per vehicle. We also have different types of traffic data that we are measuring. We have pedestrian traffic, right? In some urban areas, lots of pedestrian traffic, especially in like tourist areas and business districts. We're going to talk a little bit about how illumination and sunrise and sunset come into play. We're going to talk about speed and how that impacts dwell time, as well as some of the core changes to how we understand visibility, and how that visibility adjustment plays into taking a total opportunities metric, like a circulation metric, and turning it into an impression metric, which is how many people had a likelihood to see that content on those advertising spaces. And then the last one that we're going to talk about is home location. Where do people live that are traveling on those roadways? How do we know that? And how does that play into what we know and what we've been reporting for impressions? So let's start off with vehicular traffic counts. So vehicular traffic counts are the foundation for most out-of-home that we have traditionally measured here at Geopath, right? That's how many vehicles are driving on a particular stretch of road. Now that's one component. Just because we know how many vehicles, there's still other things that we need to take into consideration that go into how many impressions are generated for a piece of inventory that can be seen from that roadway. Things like illumination, occupancy, and how that unit is oriented toward that audience that's driving on that roadway. Now, one of the biggest changes that you're going to see with the new metrics is that we take a ton of different data resources, traffic data, speed data, mobile movement data, the physical characteristics of the street network itself, population demographics, employment, access to public transportation. There's so many different things that we are now taking into consideration when we're trying to quantify and measure and identify the expected traffic on a particular roadway. As opposed to before, when we would just go to a DOT and we would just say, okay, this DOT had a traffic count in 2009, Steve collected it, and he was frustrated, and we're pretty sure he's right. Now, DOT traffic counts are everywhere, and they are a great resource to start with, but every single traffic count from a DOT should be taken with a grain of salt. And so that's one of the biggest changes, is that we're not using DOT traffic counts as a sole input, as a foundation. We're taking that from millions of traffic counts across the country, as opposed to just maybe the 100,000 count stations, if you remember that term, for those stretches of roadways where we know inventory to be located. We're looking at the roadways around those pieces of inventory as well. What other traffic counts do we see? How are those roadways interconnected with one another? Some of that information is being informed by mobile trip movements, what routes that people take to go from point A to point B. Are those traffic counts aligning versus the number of trips that we observe or expect to be traveling down that route? And this, at the end of the day, this provides us not just traffic counts for the roadways from which inventory can be seen from, but for every single unique road segment in the US by direction. It's a massive resource that we're creating, but one that's really important to make sure that we understand the out-of-home audience and the people that are being exposed to the out-of-home audience, but also those persons that aren't. And that's important because we need to understand things like reach and frequency. We need to know the unique audience footprint of a particular piece of inventory. So every single audited piece of inventory in the Geopath inventory product is audited, and we know the measures for that from a vehicular standpoint. Now, if we want to look back a little bit, you can see sort of the trending across the markets, very, very, very close, looking at a macro level for the average vehicular traffic counts for the roadways and the inventory that we are comparing. There's a couple markets where you might see some big changes, but for the most part, very, very, very close to what we've been seeing across the board. Now, any particular piece of inventory may have swings around 15% or so, and that is to be expected. Net, obviously very, very close, but you're going to be seeing some ups and downs. We're also going to be working with our members to help work through some comparisons of existing metrics to new metrics to go through these details so that you have a better understanding of what's causing the changes in your portfolio. So one of the other important components to an impression is not just the number of vehicles, but how many people are in those vehicles. So how many persons per vehicle, also known as vehicular occupancy. Now, different markets have very different transportation uses patterns. If we're here in New York City, not many people in the city have a vehicle. People still use taxis and such. But there's a higher usage of public transportation. Well, you go out in different areas of the country, you've got a lot more vehicles per household, different household makeup. So just regionally in different markets, you're going to have a fair amount of difference of how, just at a very high level, the number of persons per vehicle on average. Then we also now, because we understand how people are moving from across the country and inside of the markets, we understand more information about those types of individuals, a lot of this being powered from this mobile location data. We see the activity points, what those trip purposes are. If we see movement from one neighborhood to another neighborhood? Are those trips occurring because they're going shopping? Are they commuting trips? Are they dropping kids off at school? Lots of different reasons. So of course, commuting, a lot of people are driving themselves to work, so very low occupancy, barely above one person per vehicle in many cases, whereas a shopping trip or a leisure trip may have a lot of people in the vehicle. And this has a big impact on the circulation. You might have the same traffic count from one method to the next, but just because the vehicular occupancy changes, because we know more context about why those trips are occurring, we're going to be able to understand that there's a different amount of people in those vehicles. And this is going to be a metric that is part of the underlying data that we use, and it's by road segment, right? Different roadways are used for different types of trips, and it changes throughout the day. You're going to see more commuting trips in the AM commute and PM commute versus the late evening and midday, where you're seeing more shopping trips or leisure trips. And across the board, we used to use just one constant metric, very flat line, and now you're seeing some fluctuations, different averages by market. Pedestrian traffic, right? This is the other side of the people that we are counting, and this can be the majority of audience in some areas. You know, down in a high density business district, core urban center, shopping strip, or a tourism area. Definitely high components of pedestrian audiences. Now, with the the propagation of mobile location data, this has been incredibly helpful for understanding the density and the activity of pedestrians at a much more granular level than we've ever been able to measure. And so this is another fantastic improvement, much higher resolution and precision of our pedestrian traffic across the country. These are some fun visuals that are created from a group called Human. They are part of Mapbox, and they're a fitness app, and you can see that just looking at the patterns is a nice visual. This is here in the island of Manhattan, different areas where people are biking, different areas where people are running, and different areas where people are walking. And you see some highlights pop out. In the running one, you see the route around Central Park pop out. You see that lake very clearly stand out. And then walking, of course, people are walking everywhere in New York City. But you see some neighborhoods like Williamsburg over in Brooklyn pop out, or Dumbo in Brooklyn as well, Astoria, Long Island City, some very trendy neighborhoods with a lot of shopping and restaurants. So this is a really nice visualization of the type of precision that you end up getting now in these new resources. Now, we've always had pedestrian modeling going on, but we just have much better resources that can now inform it. In the past 10 years, mobile phone adoption rates have gone close to 90+%, and so there's a lot of information that's coming off of it. One of the other things that we've been improving, we have much more precise information about the actual speeds that people walk in most areas. So default walking speed, comfortable walking speed for most individuals, about 3.1 miles per hour, where it used to be 3.4 in our existing methods. Slight change, but that's about 10% increase of dwell time. People are walking the same distance, so definitely has some impacts.
We get a quick question. This is actually about the vehicular occupancy.
Great.
So someone asked if there was sort of a rule or a formula as to what kind of trip yields a different kind of occupancy. So, like, does a shopping trip equal 3 people?
Yeah, it depends on the market and the region and the country. We use some information. National Household Transportation Survey is a really good resource that has some good baselines of how some of those metrics vary across the country. If you want to look at for some resources, that's a good one to look into. But we take into account information from there and the mobile trip movement of how that sort of correlates to the number of devices that we're seeing move from point A to point B as well. So there's a bunch of different things that come into play for what we're doing. But for the most part, education trips, usually taking a child to school or something, but there's other education trips too, right? Adults are going to university. The shopping trips are sort of that big bulk one where there's usually closer to 2 people on average per vehicle, two persons per vehicle.
And there was one more question about that. Things like bus occupancy, how is that calculated?
It is taken into consideration. It's just a very low percentage of vehicles on the road. Obviously, in some areas like Manhattan, you've got a lot of buses, but it still sort of plays into the average.
Cool. Great.
One of the other fun ones that I think is interesting is the illuminated. I think all of this is interesting, but is the illuminated circulation. So a lot of out-of-home assets don't have any lighting fixtures on them. They're not digital. They're not lit from the front or above or behind. They just use sunlight to make them readable. So for those units, either it might be we used to have 12-hour, 18-hour, 24-hour illumination. As 24-hour illumination, you count all audiences. But for a 12-hour illumination period, we're basically saying from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. What percentage of the daily traffic is able to see that unit? Now, this is important to know because depending on the local traffic, not every single neighborhood has the same hourly patterns, right? You're going to have business areas that are going to have early AM traffic. You might have an area that does shopping and nightlife that's going to have a lot of midday and late evening traffic, very little correlation to sort of like a commuting pattern. And that's going to be unique to that 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. window. One of the other things as we're getting into seasonal audience measurement is understanding how the daylight hours change throughout the year. And this is going to be really fun for areas that maybe see even seasonal travel. So like a beach area where you've got an influx of tourists coming in. Not only is your traffic going up, but the number of daylight hours goes from 12 on the equinox, which I believe is tomorrow, to maybe 15 hours of daylight during the summer months. So big swings there and some nice precision that we have. And one of my favorite questions is how wide is the time zone?
Yeah.
An hour. So you might have a unit on the east side of the time zone, sunrise at 6 a.m., whereas the unit on the west end of that time zone, sunrise is going to be 7 a.m. So can be big differences. So understanding the latitude and longitude of the unit is very important.
Right. No, I find that really, this one, like you said, I find this really interesting, this particular category, and how, like even you're saying, the distance of a time zone, but also the time of year later in can really impact whether you can see that unit or not. Depending on the light. Cool.
So here's an example. This is actually a unit from Williamsburg. Pulled that out. 12-hour ambient light illuminated. Right, 68% of the audience is occurring during that
6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Period. Going to south to Washington, D.C., this is a transit shelter from the downtown mall, from the Washington Mall, and 84% of audience occurring during the daylight hours of 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. So just very different patterns, and one where some of the baseline constants that we use in our existing methods just don't really reflect the precision that we're able to pull out of it. So we're going to see some changes there, which is exciting. Now, one of the trends that you are seeing across the board here is that there is an increase of illuminated circulation in almost every single DMA. And I think one of the reasons why this makes sense is that inventory is often located in busier areas, and you're going to have more traffic in those busier areas during the middle of the day when people are busy and such. But so I thought this was sort of an interesting metric that popped out of our comparisons.
Cool.
One of everyone's favorite, visibility. Now, visibility has been somewhat not visible for a lot of our members. We get a lot of questions about this. How do you guys measure visibility? And so with this new precise information of understanding where the inventory is and the detailed road network, every single separated highway, every single highway ramp now, being able to understand which roadways, which road segments are visible by those vehicular audiences and or those pedestrian audiences. We have some inventory that's facing the wrong direction on a one-way street, so it can't be seen by vehicular audiences, but it still gets pedestrian credit. So we have every single one of those inventory and roadway assignments curated, audited, and we're going through a lot of cleansing of that with the new methods to make sure that our members get the most precise and accurate information. But I wanted to address today, basically there's 3 core components that are powering the visibility model, and this hopefully makes sense to everyone. The first is how large does that media appear within the audience's field of view, right? We're looking at often rectangular shapes of varying sizes and varying distances to the audience. So understanding how large that format is, or how large that particular unit is from the audience, how far away it is from the roadway, it allows us to understand how large does it appear. So the angle, the size, and the distance all come into play for that apparent size of a unit. But not only how large it appears, but also where within the audience's field of view is it located. If it's right in the sort of central vision, obviously more likely to be seen. If it's off to the right or the left as it approaches a far peripheral, less likely to be seen, right? So those are some of the things that come into play there. And then also dwell time. The longer that you are within the viewable area of a out-of-home unit, the more likely you are going to see it. Now, in some cases, people are driving very, very fast down highways, and you may have a dwell time of just a handful of seconds. Compare that to some areas where you can see the unit from far, far away for pedestrian audiences, and you might have a dwell time upwards of a minute or even more. So each one of those measures are calculated uniquely for every single piece of inventory in the individual roadways and the directions of the vehicular and the pedestrian audience. And it's a lot of the work that we do here at Geopath is auditing inventory and making sure we understand which roadways they can be seen from. So just some of the changes, we're moving from sort of generic, I would say generic, we just have a lot more precision of understanding the geometry and the relationships between the inventory and the path of the audience now. And now that's taken into account in this visibility. So you're going to see a little bit of fluctuations as we go from an existing model to the new model, much more nuanced, still trending in approximately the same ranges, but you're seeing more unique relationships between the inventory and the audiences. Same for this is a different media format, similar distribution pattern, but you're seeing some of these peaks that were sort of created by just sort of like a left versus binary definitions of left versus right. Now we know how far left, how far right. What is the dwell time for each roadway and all the audiences passing them. So this is another one of my favorites to talk about. A lot of cool things in here. Speed and dwell time. So getting into visibility adjustment, dwell time is very important. The longer that you're near something, the more likely you are to notice it. But dwell time also influences, in addition to how likely something is to be seen, the number of spots that a single person can see for a digital piece of inventory, or a tri-vision, or a rotating scroller. Depending on how long those ad links are and how long that person can see the out-of-home inventory, so it dictates how likely people are to, or how many opportunities they have to see the media on that construction. And so this data comes from connected cars. Again, we've been using speed data for a while. We're working with the Here Maps Network and have a very, very extensive footprint of speed data. So every single piece of inventory now has speed data by hour, by day of week that we can leverage now to be able to calculate impressions, VAI, and such. Now, across the board, fairly close trending, but you are going to see some areas where we are moving away from some default speeds for different road classes. Not every roadway had speed data in our existing data set, so we would be using sort of an average speed on that road class in that area. But you'll see, especially in some of the slowest traveling marketplaces like San Francisco, New York, Washington, D.C., the vehicular audience, we already knew was slow, but it's even slower than we thought. And then the faster marketplace is trending a little bit faster than we thought. But across the board, looking really, really close. Now, Utica is a unique one because Utica we saw drop quite considerably. Those units were all on a particular road class that had a 45 mile an hour default previously. We now know where those units are, or what the actual speed is on those roadways. They're all transit shelters, and they're all in these sort of local urban streets, and so average speed of just under 25 miles an hour for that on average. So some of the markets there's only also a handful of inventory in Utica.
We had a question about the speed data. Who our partner is for the speed data?
The speed data is also coming from Here Maps. Now, Here Maps is a data company that is owned by a consortium of vehicular automobile manufacturers, Daimler, Chrysler, that group, and a couple others. And that data set powers their navigation systems. It's used all across a myriad of connected car resources, and so that speed data from all those vehicles that are going off the line are feeding back into these central resources. And so you're seeing a lot of speed data. There's a lot of different companies that sell speed data. Here Maps is the sort of like the foundation for a lot of the information that we use.
And just to let everybody know, there's been a couple questions on who the partners are for different data inputs. We have a one-pager in the Geek Out library that you can download that actually does at a high level talk about each of the partners and what kind of data what the role of their data is within the measurement overall. So it's at geekout@geopath. Well, that's our email. You can email us there, and we could actually email it to you if you want, but you can also go to our Geek Out library as well.
Thanks.
The last one.
All right, last one. All right, so in-market impressions, right? There's a lot of people that are driving down roadways. Inventory is located in marketplace, but not every single person that's driving down that roadway that's seeing that piece of inventory is from that marketplace. So this is another area that has provided an incredible amount of precision and scope and understanding for the out-of-home audiences, because mobile data has really enabled us to understand how people are moving, not only within a marketplace, but across the entire country for all inventory. So we're seeing the unique footprints, the coverage of the households of people that are traveling on those roadways to get a better understanding of the in-market versus out-of-market audiences. A lot of those out-of-market audiences, in many cases, people doing long-distance trips, business travelers, or tourists. So go to the next slide real quick. And so this is also coming from the mobile device information. We can aggregate this up, and we can look at the home locations by block group in a very safe and anonymous fashion. And there's been some big changes here, and this is really interesting. I'm sure some people their gut just wrenched looking at this, but this is something that people may or may not have been talking about when they're talking about an audience impression, but we've had markets anywhere from 40 all the way up to close to 100% in-market audiences using our existing systems. Now, our existing systems we're leveraging a lot of commuting survey data. Didn't have a full picture. Now, commuting trips make up only about 15% of the roadway. The trip purposes. But now we have a lot of information to understand all those trip purposes, all different visitors in and out of market, within a market, etc. So one of the other ways that I wanted to visualize this and breaking this down is looking at the different types of media. These are some of the common formats and some of the average in-market percentages, so of the existing methods versus the new methods. So transit shelters, right? Transit shelters are located often in and around residential neighborhoods to get access to business districts within a marketplace. But a lot of those units are located on those local streets for pedestrians to access in the market. So you would expect a lot of local audience, very close to what we used to see before. Similar to posters, posters are a little bit smaller, situated on more local roadways. Junior posters, somewhat. Oops, so those are backwards there. So posters, seeing a little bit lower in-market audience, and then bulletins, where we used to understand, given the data that existed at the time. Again, we don't want to knock what we were doing in the past, but that was what we had available. We're now seeing about 73% of audience for bulletins coming from inside the market. Now this makes sense when we start mapping it out, which we'll do in a second, because interstates, bulletins are primarily located on these major interstates, major highways, and there's a lot of long distance travel in those areas. And I'm going to go back to this.
Yeah. Just to clarify before we do leave, I just want to make sure, because I know the data, the 98 and 95% are for the junior posters. That's right. It's just the order.
The order was,
so
yeah.
I just want to make sure everybody was aware that it's not the data that's wrong. It's just the order we talked about them was different.
Mm-hmm. And so here's going back to that chart. So you're going to see now rather large fluctuations. Now the impressions may not change at all for a unit, but the in-market percentage may change. And we're on the left, you're seeing the existing methods. So most of the inventory in the marketplace showing 90 to 100% of the audience coming from inside the market. That sort of correlates back to that chart that we just showed. But this is in Atlanta. You're seeing a lot of these roadways feeding into the downtown area, seeing anywhere between 60% out of market, 60% in market to the periphery, and even in the downtown area. Like you would expect to see in the central area of Austin some out of market audience, and you saw very little of that given our inputs and our existing methods. So this new stuff is fantastic. It tells a much clearer story to be able to understand the true coverage of a particular piece of inventory. We're going to look at a couple different markets here. Then we're going to move over to southern Louisiana. Lake Charles is the market sort of in the center, just to the left of New Orleans, to the left, to the west of New Orleans and Baton Rouge. I swear I like maps. And in the existing methods, again, somewhere around 90% of audience was estimated to be from living inside the market. But now in the new methods, you look at I-10, a major interstate for people that are traveling across the country, long distance trip, a lot of people traveling through that. Now, Lake Charles has a population of about 300,000 individuals, and some high volume on these interstates as well. You wouldn't expect that, 200,000 of those 300,000 individuals on a roadway might be from inside the market. Mm-hmm. So it just tells a much clearer story, especially when you visualize it. I really like mapping this stuff out. Helps tell a good story. Same thing with New York City. New York City, a lot of tourists, obviously, a lot of out-of-town business occurring. And so you're now seeing that when we map out the home location in market percentages. You see Midtown Manhattan, financial district, some Soho, tourist areas of Manhattan really pop on the map there. So these are some fun stories that are now going to be able to have the data to back it up, be able to give you much more ammunition when you're trying to solve problems for clients, understanding where people are coming from, who they are, how many people, and such. And really, this is just getting into the total number of people. We're not even getting into demographics at this point. We're just talking about how we're calculating impressions. So real quick review. We talked about vehicular traffic now coming from not just DOT traffic, but now we're taking traffic data in addition to the network, mobile movement. Same thing with person per vehicle. It's sort of nuanced now and precise to the individual trip motivation by time of day for a particular stretch of road, where those people are coming from. Pedestrian traffic, much more sensitive now, powered and mostly now in part by this mobile location data, seeing a trend here. A lot of this stuff wouldn't be possible without some of the new data sources that are out. Illumination probably could do that without mobile location data, maybe not the hourly variation, but this is just an improvement sort of to the process, and this comes out of having this hourly granularity to be able to even take advantage of something as nuanced as sunrise and sunset times at different lat longs. The speed and dwell time, connected car mobile data, also improvement on the existing process. The visibility adjustment, this is an improvement really coming from the precision and the mapping and understanding the detailed network. Same with the home location, again, mobile location data powering a lot of this, informing us to create a much more precise and accurate impression for all the out-of-home audit inventory. So I imagine there are probably a couple questions.
Yep. Yes, so just want to pause and give everybody a chance. I know there's been several questions throughout, but I want to give everybody opportunity to ask any other questions as they come to them. I know we've covered a lot of ground today, and I do want to thank Dylan for doing that and talking us through this. I think there's really great, insightful information that I think our members want to know about. So. As people may be typing question in or not, I just want to remind you of some things coming up and some things that happened already. So in case you missed it, we did our May Insight training sessions on the May 30th and 31st. And if you haven't been joining those, just so you know what they are, they occur at the last Thursday and Friday of every month. And the Thursday session will always be the foundational session. So we'll talk about, which will largely be focused on the Insight Suite itself and how to use it in the different evolutions of that and the new features and functionality being added. And we'll walk through some workflows and things like that. But on the Friday, it's always going to be an advanced level session where we are going to try to walk through and work through different real life use cases with some of our members. And we'll really be focusing on the new data and how to use that data to create value for clients, how to answer clients' needs with what we're developing today. So we did one with Enza Chiodi, who's a partner at McDonald's Media, and it was really a great session where we took a use case that we had done previously and took it from an agency perspective. So I think I got a lot of good feedback from some of the operators who watched it on how this was really great, giving them some line of sight into the process that an agency goes through and how they think about the data and how they use the data and how they use the information that they get back from the operators to make decisions. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out, please do. It's on our website. You can go to the Geek Out tab on our website and just scroll down through the out-of-home office hours. Or you can find out any of our webinars on our YouTube channel as well. Brian, is there a question? Okay.
This one was just asking a little bit more about the source of the mobile data.
Sure. So we work with a couple partners to create the underlying trip database, but behind the scenes, the mobile location data is coming through our partners over at AirSage, and AirSage leverages mobile location data from SDKs through SafeGraph. So you've got basically the opt-in mobile location data services that are coming from apps, social apps, fitness applications, navigation apps, things of that nature. So there's about 120, 150 million devices within that monthly active users in that set, and so we leverage that. And so that provides an incredible foundation to understand, albeit a sample of the population, of understanding those activities and where those people are traveling to and from. And then one of the powerful things that AirSage is able to do is to understand how representative each of those devices are of the full population, and then can provide to us a full view of the population while protecting privacy. So Geopath and its members aren't getting our hands on any of the raw location data or device level data through that approach. It gives us a level of sort of protection of privacy and data regulations, still somewhat in flux, but still providing us the ability to answer anything that we need to do for calculating impressions.
Another one was, does the increased use of mobile data collection mean you'll be able to do audits more often?
That's a good question. We actually have been speeding up the sort of the cadence of doing audience calculations for the past 12 months, maybe even longer than that, almost for the past 2 years. As Scott said, we've been collecting this traffic information, creating this traffic information with our partners over at City Labs to understand the flow of people and the home location of those individuals. And so that information is being used to create this forecasting data set, but we also have monthly historical information, and that's coming in every month. So we've been collecting that to create historical profiles, to create forecasting profiles of when, what the expected audience delivery is going to be. So we're going to continue to do that. And so that cadence right now is coming in once a month. At that point, it's really not the rate of mobile data collection, it's the rate of processing that becomes the pipeline. So mobile location data is always coming in. We're creating audiences once a month to be able to create historical profiles that will be able to be used to create forecasting profiles as seasonal views and annual views that people are familiar with.
Cool. Awesome.
Just one more. It was about the the timeline of sort of leaving the beta stage.
Sure. So right now, Geopath is in the process of sort of streamlining some of the calculations, finalizing some of the workflows here, calibrating some of the final tweaks on everything, and re-auditing inventory. But the beta phase is intended to be coming to a close this summer, as we go into fall, October 1st being the official date to be using the new Insights data and the Insights suite for planning purposes for campaigns starting in 2020.
Great. So just before we head out, I want to give a plug for our Insights Insight Suite training sessions for next week. And so the foundational session again next Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. There's some major updates to the tool itself that will be coming out, and we'll walk through some of those. But I also want to talk about the advanced session on Friday. We're going to be joined by Tony Chaffee from Adams Outdoor. He's General Sales Manager in Eastern Pennsylvania. And we're working on a use case where we're going to walk through a local, and actually I'd call it more of a regional use case for a Toyota Motor Group, and really understanding how audience can play a role in helping select inventory and how the new different audiences available really impact decision making for sales reps throughout whatever market you're in. So I think that's going to be a great one. We'll be sending out another newsletter announcing that and kind of promoting it over the next couple days as well. So also just want to say again, many thanks to everybody for joining this, and thank you again to Dylan. And if you didn't get a chance to ask a question, or maybe you didn't have a chance to get to it, please reach out at geekout@geopath.org. We're happy to answer any questions there as well. And you can always reach out to us directly. So again, just want to say thank you, and hope everybody has a great rest of their afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah, it should be up top. Cool. Nice.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Such a sweet goodbye.
All right, let me.
Cool.
We had quite a few people, huh?